There's a particular kind of vertigo that comes with discovering your life has been built on carefully constructed lies. Not the small everyday deceptions we all engage in, but the foundational ones that reshape your entire understanding of who you are. I was 22 years old when I learned that my family, the one constant I thought I understood, was actually a mosaic of secrets, half-truths, and betrayals that stretched back decades before I was even born. And in that moment of discovery, standing in my childhood bedroom with my phone still warm in my hand, I felt myself come untethered from everything I'd ever known to be true. They say blood is thicker than water, but what they don't tell you is how that thickness can suffocate you, can clot and congeal around family secrets until they form something impenetrable. Something toxic. Something that, once disturbed, contaminates everything it touches. It started innocently enough, with a social media scroll on a rainy Sunday afternoon. I'd been looking through my older half-sister's profile. She lived in our hometown while I'd moved away with my parents years ago, when I noticed a comment from someone with our same distinctive surname. The profile picture showed a woman who looked to be in her late 20s, with eyes that held an unsettling familiarity. I stared at that tiny image for what felt like hours, some primal part of my brain registering a connection before my conscious mind could make sense of it. When I finally showed the profile to my mother, her reaction told me everything I needed to know before she even opened her mouth. The subtle stiffening of her posture, the way her eyes darted away from the screen, the small, almost imperceptible intake of breath, physical tells of a truth long buried rushing to the surface. "That's your father's other daughter," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. In that way parents adopt when they're trying to protect you from something that's already done its damage. From before we were married. But that wasn't quite right, was it? Because as the story unfolded over the next excruciating hours, I learned that this woman, this stranger who shared my blood, my surname, and apparently my facial structure, had been born while my parents were engaged. While my mother was planning their wedding, my father had been living a double life with his ex-wife, creating another family, in parallel to the one he was promising to build. He always claimed she wasn't his, my mother continued, staring at a point somewhere beyond my shoulder. He said his ex just gave the baby our surname so both her daughters would have the same last name. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this new reality. I had always known about my older half-sister from my father's first marriage. She was a fixed part of our family narrative, the daughter from before, who visited occasionally and sent birthday cards. But this other sister? This secret sibling whose existence had been carefully erased from our family history? She represented something different entirely. Active deception, not just omission. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept returning to my phone, staring at this woman's profile, searching her features for pieces of myself, for echoes of my father, for anything that might help make sense of this revelation. I found myself scrolling through years of her posts, constructing a patchwork biography of this person who was, biologically at least, my sister. She liked vintage clothing and obscure indie bands. She had a cat named after a literary character. She graduated from university 5 years earlier. She existed, fully formed, with a life entirely separate from mine, a life that, had things been different, might have intersected with my own in countless small, significant ways. The weight of all these lost possibilities pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. For 3 days I carried this knowledge like a stone in my throat, unable to swallow it down, unable to spit it out. I went through the motions of my daily life, attending classes, meeting friends, calling home, while this new reality hummed beneath the surface of every interaction. I found myself studying the faces of strangers on the street, wondering if I had other siblings out there, other pieces of myself scattered like seeds by a father I suddenly realized I didn't know at all. Then came the call from my cousin back home. We'd always been close despite the distance, speaking weekly, serving as each other's connection to the different worlds we inhabited. But that day, her voice held something unusual, a mixture of excitement and apprehension that set my nerves on edge before she'd even delivered her news. "You'll never guess who showed up in the village yesterday," she began, and somehow I already knew. Both of them had come, my known half-sister and this new one, this secret sister, arriving unannounced in our small village where gossip traveled faster than light. They'd made a tour of it, apparently, visiting relatives on my father's side, distant cousins, even neighbors who'd known my parents before I was born. Everyone except me and my brothers, the children my father had chosen to acknowledge, to raise, to claim. "Do you want to say hi?" my cousin asked suddenly. "They're here with me now," Before I could respond, the screen filled with an unfamiliar face. Those same eyes I'd been studying online now animated in motion, attached to a person who shared my DNA. Our gazes met through the digital divide, and for a breathless moment, I felt a strange, unwelcome recognition. Then, just as quickly, she was gone, ducking out of frame with such obvious intention that it felt like a physical rejection. That single moment, her deliberate withdrawal from even this most casual introductions, crystallized something in me. This wasn't just about my father's betrayal anymore. It was about something more immediate, more personal. This woman, my sister by blood, had chosen to meet everyone connected to me without actually meeting me. Had chosen to insert herself into my extended family narrative, while explicitly avoiding any direct contact with the siblings she supposedly shared so much with. Later that night, my cousin called again with the full story. My secret sister had known about me for years. Had known and chosen silence, distance. Had come to our village not to connect, but to claim space. To establish presence. To weave herself into the fabric of a place that held my earliest memories. To announce herself not to us, her siblings, but to everyone around us, creating a strange, inverted intimacy where distant relatives now knew more about my own family structure than I did. It felt like a second betrayal, somehow worse than the first. My father's deception belonged to the past, to a time before I existed. But my sister's choices were happening now, in real time, with full awareness of the impact they might have. That night, I dreamed of a house with rooms I'd never seen before, corridors that shouldn't exist, doors that opened onto impossible spaces. In the dream, I could hear voices from behind those doors, familiar voices engaged in conversations I wasn't part of, sharing jokes and memories I didn't share. I woke gasping, sheets tangled around my legs, the phantom sensation of exclusion following me into consciousness. Over the next few months, I withdrew from my father's side of the family almost entirely. Each conversation felt contaminated by what they knew and had chosen not to tell me, by the conspiracy of silence that had surrounded me for 22 years. My calls with my acknowledged half-sister, always somewhat obligatory, maintained largely to please our father, dwindled to perfunctory birthday exchanges, stilted and formal. I couldn't look at her without wondering what else she knew, what other secrets she kept behind her careful smiles. My relationship with my father deteriorated most of all. Every childhood memory was now suspect, viewed through the distorting lens of this new knowledge. Had he been thinking of his other daughter during my piano recitals, my graduation? Had he made comparisons? Had he ever wished he'd made different choices? The questions multiplied like cancer cells, malignant and unstoppable, until every interaction with him felt like navigating a minefield of unspoken truths. "You seem distant lately," he said during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "Is everything okay at school?" I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it, his concern for my academic performance while the real issue hung between us like a shadow. But I didn't confront him. Something in me couldn't bear to have that conversation, to watch him fumble through explanations or, worse, justifications for choices made decades ago that were still sending shockwaves through the present. So I mumbled reassurances and changed the subject, adding another layer to the family tradition of selective truths. My mother noticed, of course. How could she not? But she seemed almost relieved by my withdrawal from my father's family, as if some part of her had been waiting 20 years for me to recognize what she'd always known about them. Sometimes I caught her watching me with a mixture of concern and something else, a strange, sad vindication that made me wonder what other wounds she carried from her marriage, what other betrayals she'd absorbed and never spoken of. I threw myself into building a life entirely separate from my family history. I made new friends who knew nothing about my complicated family tree, dated people who'd never meet my relatives, chose career paths that would take me even further from my hometown. I was constructing an identity that existed independent of blood ties, one that couldn't be disrupted by revelations about who I was or wasn't related to. Or so I thought. 2 years passed in this careful equilibrium of distance and denial. I graduated university, started my first real job, moved into my own apartment. I called home regularly but kept conversations superficial, developed an art form of asking questions that directed attention away from anything substantive. I visited for major holidays but kept the trips brief, scheduled to minimize extended family gatherings. I built walls and maintained them with vigilance. Then came the message that breached those walls in an instant. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening as I was cooking dinner in my tiny kitchen, music playing, wine poured, a moment of simple, hard-won contentment. The notification sound barely registered at first, just another ping in the constant digital background noise of modern life. But when I glanced at my phone and saw the name, her name, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. My hands went cold. My stomach dropped. The wooden spoon I'd been holding clattered to the floor, splattering sauce across the linoleum like blood spatter at a crime scene. "I'm going to be in your city next month," the message read. "I think it's time we met, don't you?" Just like that, casual, presumptive, as if we were old acquaintances who'd simply fallen out of touch rather than strangers connected by a tangle of deception and abandonment. As if she hadn't explicitly avoided me 2 years earlier when she had the chance to say hello. As if she hadn't spent those same 2 years making no effort to contact me directly while integrating herself into every other aspect of my extended family. I stared at those words until they blurred, until they no longer looked like language but like abstract shapes, meaningless and foreign. My carefully constructed separate life suddenly felt permeable, vulnerable. She knew where I lived. She was coming here, to my territory, the space I'd created specifically to exist beyond the reach of family complications. For 3 days I left the message unanswered. I drafted responses and deleted them, oscillating between cold politeness and raw honesty, finding neither approach satisfactory. How do you start a conversation with someone who is simultaneously a stranger and one of the closest genetic relatives you have? What language exists for that unique circumstance? In the end, what compelled me to respond wasn't resolution, but the sudden, unwelcome realization that my silence mirrored hers, that in not answering, I was perpetuating the same pattern of avoidance and unspoken truths that had created this situation in the first place. So I wrote back, a single line that contained neither rejection nor welcome. "Why now?" Her answer came quickly, as if she'd been waiting by her phone for my response. "Because I'm tired of being the family secret." "Aren't you?" Those words lodged in my chest like shrapnel. Because yes, that's exactly what I'd become as well. The family member who knew too much, who couldn't be trusted with the comfortable fictions everyone else seemed content to live with. The one who had to be managed, appeased, kept at a safe distance lest I disrupt the narrative. In running from one family secret, I'd transformed into another. As the date of her visit approached, the pressure from my father's side of the family intensified. Suddenly, relatives who had barely contacted me in years were calling, sending messages, even reaching out to mutual connections to convey their opinions on a matter that should have been entirely personal. My grandmother, my father's mother, who had known about this secret sister all along but chosen to participate in the conspiracy of silence, now positioned herself as a mediator. "Family is family," she told me during an unexpected Sunday call, her voice carrying the weight of authority she'd always wielded like a weapon. "Whatever happened in the past is in the past. You young people need to move forward together." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. These were the same people who had maintained this secret for decades, who had looked me in the eye year after year, knowing they were withholding fundamental truths about my own identity. The same people who had welcomed my secret sister into their homes, introduced her to their friends, shown her family photo albums that included pictures of me as a child, all while keeping her existence hidden from me. And now they expected me to simply open my arms, my life, my heart to this stranger because we shared genetic material, because it would make things more comfortable for them. Each call, each message, each well-meaning intervention only strengthened my resistance. This wasn't about forgiveness or moving forward. This was about autonomy, my right to choose which relationships to nurture, which connections to honor, which parts of my history to incorporate into my present. If blood created automatic obligations, then where had those obligations been when my father abandoned his second daughter? When my half-sister kept her sibling's existence from me? Well, when my entire extended family conspired in a deception that fundamentally altered my understanding of who I was. The more they pushed, the more I retreated. I stopped answering calls from that side of the family entirely. I blocked certain numbers, muted conversations, created digital distance to match the emotional walls I'd built. But in quiet moments, doubts crept in. Was I being unfair? Was I punishing my secret sister for our father's sins? Was I, in my resistance, becoming as deceptive and avoidant as the family members I resented? These questions haunted me, circling through my mind during sleepless nights, interrupting moments of concentration at work, casting shadows over what should have been casual social interactions. The impending meeting, or non-meeting, as I still hadn't decided, took on proportions far beyond a simple introduction. It became symbolic, a moment that would define who I was in relation to my history, my family, my own values. 1 week before she was scheduled to arrive in my city, my father called. We hadn't spoken directly in months, our communication reduced to group messages and information relayed through my mother or brothers. Hearing his voice, so familiar yet increasingly foreign, sent a jolt of complicated emotions through me. Love, anger, longing, resentment, all tangled together in a knot I couldn't begin to unravel. "You need to meet her," he said without preamble. Not "I hope you'll consider," or "it would mean a lot to me if." Need. As if my choices in this matter were predetermined, my agency non-existent. "Why?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Why do I need to meet someone who had 2 years to reach out but chose not to? Someone who deliberately avoided me when she had the chance to say hello? Someone who made a point of meeting everyone connected to me except me? His silence in response to these questions told me everything I needed to know. He had no answers because he'd never considered these perspectives. In his mind, in all their minds, this was a simple equation: shared blood equals automatic connection. The complexity of human emotion, the impact of secrets and lies, the legitimate hurt caused by deliberate exclusion. These were inconvenient complications in a narrative they'd already written. One where I was assigned the role of welcoming, forgiving sibling regardless of my own feelings on the matter. "She's your sister," he said finally, as if this settled everything. "So you admit it now," I replied, the words escaping before I could consider their impact. "After 22 years of denying it, you finally acknowledge she's your daughter." Another silence, longer this time. I could hear his breathing on the other end of the line, could almost see him struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't further incriminate him in a deception that had long since been exposed. "The past is complicated," he said eventually. "But this isn't about me. This is about you two, siblings who should know each other." "No," I countered, a strange calm settling over me. "This is absolutely about you. This is about choices you made before I was born that you're still making me pay for. This is about secrets you kept that weren't yours alone to keep. This is about you trying to orchestrate reconciliations without ever taking responsibility for the damage you cause." I ended the call after that, my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in months. Because in that moment of confrontation, I'd finally articulated something I'd been feeling but couldn't name. This wasn't just about meeting or not meeting my secret sister. This was about reclaiming narrative control over my own life story, about refusing to be a character in someone else's redemption arc. Our date. The day before my secret sister was set to arrive in my city, I found myself at the harbor, watching boats navigate the narrow channel between safety and open water. I always loved this spot, the visual metaphor of passage so explicit, the way the vessels had to move precisely, purposefully, to transition from one state to another. Too far left, rocks. Too far right, a dangerous shoal. The only way forward was through the middle, maintaining balance while in motion. I thought about the choice before me, the meeting I still hadn't committed to or declined. There seemed to be no perfect path, each option laden with potential regrets. Meet her and risk opening myself to further hurt, further complications in an already tangled family dynamic. Don't meet her, and potentially miss a connection that might bring something valuable to my life, or at least provide answers to questions I'd been carrying for years. As the sun began to set, casting long gold-orange fingers across the water, I realized I'd been thinking about this all wrong. I'd been approaching the situation as if there were only two options: full embrace or complete rejection, when in reality, human relationships offer infinite gradations of intimacy and distance. I didn't have to decide, in this moment, what my secret sister would mean to me for the rest of my life. I only had to decide whether I was willing to have a conversation, to create a space where something might begin. And wasn't that worth the risk? Not for my father's sake, not to appease my extended family, but for myself. To know that whatever relationship did or didn't develop between us would be the result of my own choices, rather than fears or others' expectations. Back in my apartment, I sent her a message before I could second-guess myself. "Coffee tomorrow. 2 p.m. Almoy." Followed by the name and address of a cafe near my workplace, public enough to feel safe, private enough for conversation that might venture into difficult territory. I didn't add pleasantries or explanations. I didn't need to justify this decision, even to myself. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, as if some part of me recognized that regardless of what happened the next day, I had taken back control of my own narrative. I'd made a choice based not on obligation or avoidance, but on possibility. The possibility that sometimes the most transformative connections emerge from the most painful histories. The cafe was busy when I arrived, exactly 3 minutes before our scheduled meeting time. I chose a table in the corner, positioned so I could see the door, but wasn't immediately visible from the entrance. A small, perhaps petty power move, letting me see her before she saw me, giving me those extra seconds to compose myself while she scanned the room. I recognized her immediately when she walked in, though she looked different from her photos, different from that brief glimpse during the video call 2 years ago. In person, our shared genetics were both more and less apparent. Similar eye shape, but different color. Similar nose, but on a face structured differently than mine. She moved with a confidence I hadn't expected, scanning the room with purpose rather than hesitation. When our eyes met, something shifted in her expression, a barely perceptible change that might have been relief or anxiety or both. She approached my table directly, no pretense of uncertainty about my identity. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she said as she slid into the chair across from me. Up close, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the carefully applied makeup that couldn't quite hide the shadows under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hand as she placed her phone on the table. She was nervous, genuinely, visibly nervous, and that simple human vulnerability did more to soften my defenses than any argument or appeal could have. We ordered coffee. We exchanged awkward pleasantries about the weather, the cafe, her trip. And then, when those superficial topics were exhausted, we sat in silence for a long moment, two adults connected by blood and separated by everything else, trying to find a starting point for a conversation with no established script. "Why did you avoid me?" I asked finally, deciding that if we were going to do this, we would do it honestly. 2 years ago, during that video call, you literally ran from the camera. She didn't flinch from the question, which surprised me. "I panicked," she said simply. "I spent years imagining that moment, building it up in my mind, and when it actually happened, when I saw your face, it was too real. Too sudden. I wasn't ready." "And you're ready now?" She considered this, stirring her coffee slowly. "I don't know if ready is the right word, but I'm tired of living with this divide. Tired of being the secret daughter to half the family and the acknowledged daughter to the other half. Tired of navigating around the empty spaces where relationships should be." Her words resonated more than I wanted to admit. Wasn't that exactly what I'd been doing these past 2 years? Navigating around empty spaces, building my life in careful avoidance of the family-shaped holes I couldn't fill. "Why didn't you contact me directly?" I asked. "After that day. You had 2 years. "The same reason you didn't contact me, I think," she replied, meeting my gaze directly. "Fear. Fear. Pride. Not knowing where to start. Feeling like if you wanted a relationship, you would reach out first." "That's not fair," I protested. "I didn't even know you existed until 2 years ago. You knew about me your whole life." "Did I?" She raised an eyebrow. "I knew our father had other children. I knew your names, saw occasional photos. But no you. No. I knew the idea of you. The fact of you. Not you as people." Another silence fell between us, less awkward than the first, but heavier with unspoken thoughts. I studied her face, searching for resemblances not just to myself but to our father, to her mother whom I'd never met, to anyone who might help me contextualize her existence in relation to my own. "What do you want from this?" I asked eventually. "From meeting me. What's your best-case scenario here?" She seemed taken aback by the directness of the question, but after a moment's consideration, she answered with equal candor. "I don't know exactly. Connection, I guess. Understanding. Not having to pretend anymore that half my family doesn't exist. Not having to be careful about what I say around certain relatives to avoid mentioning you, just as they've spent my whole life being careful not to mention me around you." There was no accusation in her tone, just a simple statement of the exhausting reality we'd both been living. Parallel lives carefully maintained by elaborate systems of selective truths. And in that moment, I felt a strange kinship with her. Not the artificial closeness of shared DNA, but the genuine connection of shared experience. We'd both been shaped by the same deception, both been forced to build our identities around carefully maintained absences. "I'm not looking for a best friend," she continued, when I didn't immediately respond. "I'm not expecting some instant sisterly bond or weekly phone calls or holiday gatherings. I just want acknowledgement, I guess. The chance to know you as a person rather than a concept. The opportunity to see if there's something worth building here." Her honesty disarmed me. I'd come prepared for emotional manipulation, for demands, for the same pressure my father's family had been applying. Instead, she was offering perspective and possibility without expectation, the very approach I'd been craving from everyone else involved in this situation. "I can't promise anything," I said slowly. "I'm still angry, not at you specifically, but at the whole situation. At our father, at your sister, at all the adults who thought it was okay to keep this secret for so long." "I understand that," she nodded. "I've been angry too, in different ways. Angry at being the one who wasn't acknowledged. Angry at being treated like a family embarrassment, rather than a person. But I'm trying to figure out how to build something new that isn't completely defined by that anger." As our conversation continued, moving from past hurts to present lives, I found myself gradually relaxing. Not completely. There was still too much unresolved for that, but enough to engage genuinely, to listen without immediately searching for hidden agendas, to share small pieces of myself without fear of how they might be used or interpreted. We talked for almost 3 hours, moving from coffee to early dinner, as the cafe transitioned into its evening service. We discovered unexpected commonalities, a shared love of obscure documentaries, similar taste in music, the same irrational dislike of a particular food. Small things, insignificant in isolation, that nevertheless created tiny bridges between our separate worlds. When we finally parted on the sidewalk outside, there was a moment of awkwardness, the social uncertainty of how to end an encounter with no established protocol. Not quite friends, more than strangers, connected by blood but not by history or choice. "I'm here for 3 more days, she said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "No pressure, but if you wanted to meet again before I leave." I nodded, not committing but not refusing. "I'll text you." As I watched her walk away, a complicated mixture of emotions churned within me. Relief that the meeting was over, surprise at how differently it had gone than I'd feared, lingering anger at the circumstances that had made such an encounter necessary, and underneath it all, a small, unexpected seed of curiosity about who this person might become in my life. In the days and weeks that followed our meeting, something shifted in me, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, like sediment slowly settling after long disturbance. I felt lighter somehow, as if the conversation had released a pressure I hadn't fully recognized was there. I did meet with her once more before she left town. A brief, less intense lunch where we talked mainly about our current lives rather than our shared past. When she departed, we made no grand promises of regular contact or future visits. Instead, there was simply an openness, a door left unlocked rather than flung wide or firmly shut. Over the following months, we maintained sporadic communication. Occasional texts, social media interactions, brief video calls on significant dates. Not the intense connection that exists between siblings raised together, but not the complete absence that had defined our relationship before. Something new. Something we were creating on our own terms, free from the expectations our father's family tried to impose. My relationship with our father remained complicated, neither fully reconciled nor completely severed. There were conversations we still needed to have, truths that still needed to be acknowledged. But the urgency had diminished somewhat. I no longer felt that my entire identity hinged on his explanations or apologies. I was beginning to understand that I could honor the parts of him that existed in me without accepting the choices he had made, that I could create my own definition of family that wasn't dependent on his. 6 months after our first meeting, my secret sister, though I'd stopped thinking of her that way, sent me a photo. It wasn't particularly remarkable, just a bookshelf in her apartment, lined with titles both familiar and unfamiliar. But what caught my attention was a small framed picture on one of the shelves, a photo of us from our second meeting, sitting across from each other at that cafe table, both looking slightly uncomfortable but undeniably present. The message that accompanied the photo was simple. Still figuring out where this fits in my life, but glad it's there. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something settle into place inside me. Because that's what we were both doing, wasn't we? Figuring out where these new relationships fit in the lives we built without them. Not erasing the past or pretending the hurt hadn't happened, but creating space for new possibilities alongside those old wounds. That night, I found myself looking through old family albums, something I'd avoided since the initial revelation 2 years earlier. I studied photos of my childhood, of family gatherings, where one sister was present and one was absent, of a father who looked exactly as I remembered, but who I now understood differently. And for the first time, I felt neither the crushing weight of betrayal nor the desperate need to untangle every deception. Instead, I felt a quiet acceptance of complexity, the recognition that most families contain multitudes, love and hurt, truth and lies, presence and absence. I thought about blood then, not as the definitive bond that my father's family tried to portray as, nor as the meaningless biological coincidence I'd tried to convince myself it was during my angriest moments, but as something in between, a starting point rather than a conclusion, a potential connection that can be strengthened through choice and care, or weakened through neglect and deception. Important, yes, but not all important. Significant, but not solely defining. In the end, that's what I've come to understand about family, that it exists in layers, in contradictions, in the spaces between what we're born into and what we choose. That sometimes the most profound connections emerge from the most painful revelations. That forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean forgetting or even fully reconciling, but simply creating enough space in your heart to hold both the hurt and the possibility of something new. I don't know what my relationship with my once secret sister will look like in 5 years, in 10. I don't know if we'll grow closer or if this tentative connection will remain just that, tentative, peripheral, a footnote rather than a chapter in each other's lives. I don't know if our shared blood will eventually translate into genuine closeness, or if we'll always exist at this careful distance, connected more by mutual understanding of a complicated past than by daily intimacy. But I do know this: I'm no longer running from the complexity. No longer pretending that family is either all-important or completely irrelevant. No longer allowing other people, whether my father, his relatives, or even my sister herself, to define what our relationship should be. There's a strength in that realization, a quiet power in claiming narrative authority over your own life. Not the dramatic power of ultimatums or confrontations, but the steady, enduring power of authentic choice, of deciding for yourself what blood means, what family means, what connection means. And maybe that's the most significant discovery in all of this, not the revelation of a secret sister or the uncovering of decades-old deceptions, but the understanding that even in circumstances we didn't choose, we retain the ability to choose our response, to define relationships on our own terms, to build meaning from brokenness, to find, in the midst of inherited complications, the possibility of chosen connections that honor both our past and our present. That understanding doesn't erase the pain of betrayal or the years of unnecessary secrecy. It doesn't excuse the adults who made decisions that affected my understanding of myself and my family. It doesn't instantly transform strained relationships into healthy ones. But it does provide a path forward, not back to some imagined state of innocence before knowledge, not towards some idealized vision of perfect family harmony, but into a future where painful truths can coexist with new beginnings, where blood can be acknowledged without being blindly obeyed, where family can be both what we're born into and what we deliberately cultivate. That, I think, is the truest resolution available to us, not an ending tied in a perfect bow, but a continuing story we're now writing together, separately, imperfectly, but at least with open eyes and honest hearts.